Now, our next subject is a difficult one for many, but one which my guest says we need to be talking about more to stop it from happening. Steve Phillip is from Harrogate, and Steve lost his son Jordan to suicide 3 years ago. Steve then went on to set up the Jordan Legacy to try to advance mental health services and, more importantly perhaps, to get more people talking about suicide prevention and ultimately to try to stop people from taking their own lives. Well, Steve is with me on the line. Steve, thanks for joining me this morning. First of all, tell us about Jordan.
Yeah, morning, Adam. Jordan was 34 when he took his own life, as you say, 3 years ago, just this Sunday gone, actually. In many respects, a highly functioning young man. He had his own house, lovely girlfriend and partner, a loving family. He worked as an officer for the Independent Office of Police Conduct, and he was the guy that many of his friends, and he had a huge network of friends, would often come to, if they were struggling. So from an outside perspective, he was very much someone who had it all going on, really.
So this was a huge shock to you and the family?
I think the suicide, absolutely. Jordan was diagnosed with clinical anxiety and depression back in 2015. And we know subsequently from journals of his that we read when we were clearing his house out that he had been considering and even planning suicide for, over 4 years, at least that period of time. But it was never a conversation that we had. It was never something that was on our radar. So you're absolutely right. It came as a complete shock.
So all that said, then, this is why you came up with the idea of setting up the Jordan Legacy.
Yeah, I mean, I knew nothing about suicide. I couldn't recall initially ever having been touched by the topic at all. Something I often say that I'm quite embarrassed about is my knowledge of mental health was very poor, even though I had a son, who had a mental health illness. And, I just realized that it wasn't until I started talking about this subject very publicly that suddenly almost everyone that I spoke to seemed to have some connection or have had some experience with suicide in their lives. But up until that point, I'd never really come across the topic.
So how does the Jordan Legacy work then?
Well, I was really clear in the early stages that I wanted to be able to do something in a practical sense. I didn't understand this world, as it was all new to me, so I went on a very rapid learning journey and ended up speaking to people right across the world who'd been working in suicide prevention and mental health. And the message that was coming across loud and clear each time was that, suicide is in itself a practical act. And most suicides are actually preventable, even up until the last moment. So what I wanted to understand was, what are the circumstances that lead someone to wanting to end their own lives, and what are the practical acts that they might undertake? And how do you prevent that? So I didn't want to become another crisis helpline, for example, even though we do provide resources and signposting on our website. I wanted to talk practically with design and build companies who build bridges and outdoor spaces and buildings where people might end their lives. I wanted to talk to workplaces and people in communities to really raise awareness about the issue of suicide and the scale of it, and discuss with them what they could do, in a practical sense to help mitigate the risk.
Listening to what you've just been saying now and sitting here as a dad, I can't imagine what you went through and what you are continuing to go through. And I've been looking at some of the background to this, and you're not alone in this, are you? Because you're running this alongside a chap called Mike, and I love the line here, and I hope that's the right thing to say when it says Mike and Steve are friends who wish they had never met. And I think that probably sums up exactly what you and he and many others, sadly, are having to go through and having to deal with.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Adam. I mean, Mike and I came together after. Mike has a background with the BBC. He was a reporter at BBC and Sky and a journalist for many years, and lost his son Ross in February of 2021. And we came together after I saw Mike on TV sharing his own story, and I was kind of a year into my journey by then, and reached out to Mike, and we started a project earlier this year together called Baton of Hope, that in September I kind of handed the baton over to Mike, who's running with that. And this is going to be a very massive event taking place next year in the summer of 2023 to raise awareness about suicide prevention, while I continue on with my work now with the Jordan Legacy. But yeah, we've been brought together under circumstances that you would never want to be brought together under.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you prevent one suicide, then that's a success, isn't it?
I think it is. I think it's an interesting point you raise, because if we consider the impact of suicide, and something that really shocked me in the early days was that for each death by suicide, the ripple effect, as we would call it, will have an impact directly or indirectly on average on another 135 people. So there's a massive impact. We lose 6,500 people a year in the UK to suicide. So you've got over 750,000 people each year that are impacted in some way by suicide. And each life we save, yes, is a success. But kind of our ambition, if you like, at the Jordan Legacy is to say, how do we change this headline figure? We are consistently seeing 6,500 people die each year. And sadly, the age range is getting younger as well, which is one of the biggest concerns.
How can people support what you're doing, Steve?
Well, if you go to the jordanlegacy.com website, they'll kind of get to learn about our strategy and an approach. We're not a typical fundraising charitable organisation in that respect. We do work very practically. We meet with government and work with organisations. But I think the important thing is that we're always looking for people to help, fundraise. And, I do this 100% of the time. It's a full-time job for me, and we rely on private donations. We don't take any government funding or grants of any kind, but people will see via the website lots of different ways that they can support us.
Steve, good to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Steve Phillip there from Harrogate and the Jordan Legacy.